Expression FM presents the Me Too podcast. Me Too.
Me Too.
Me Too.
Me Too.
Me Too.
Me Too.
In light of the hashtag #MeToo campaign, a flood of new sexual harassment and assault stories have come to the forefront across both social media and the news as a whole. In this 3-part series, we'll be looking at sexual harassment and assault within society, within university, and also looking at the recovery process after being sexually harassed or assaulted. In this episode, we're discussing the wider societal problem of sexual harassment and assault. The following podcast series contains content some may find disturbing.
October 5th, 2017. Harvey Weinstein paid off sexual harassment accusers for decades. November 9th, 2017. Louis C.K. is accused by 5 women of sexual misconduct. 13th of November 2017. Hollywood holds #MeToo march against sexual harassment. November 16th, 2017. Kevin Spacey, Old Vic reveals 20 staff allegations against him. November 17th, 2017. How Sylvester Stallone was accused of sexually assaulting a 16-year-old fan.
Gwyneth Paltrow, Angelina Jolie, Rose McGowan, Lisa Campbell, Zoe Brock, Asia Argento, Lisette Anthony, Lucia Evans, Mira Sorvino, Rosanna Arquette, Ashley Judd. These names all have one thing in common: Harvey Weinstein's unwanted and unsolicited attention. And this is less than an eighth of the total list. On October 5th, the New York Times released an extensive report alleging that Harvey Weinstein, co-founder of Miramax and one of the entertainment industry's most powerful executives, had spent the past 30 years using his position to sexually harass women by promising them future success. The consequences were rapid. By October 8th, Weinstein had been fired from the Weinstein Company, the production studio he co-founded with his brother. Since then, more than 90 women have accused him of sexual harassment and assault, 14 of them alleging rape. On October 10th, an audio clip was released, detailing an incident with Weinstein. Across the 93 accounts of Weinstein's misconduct, there is a shared narrative. Women were often invited to his hotel to discuss work, and Weinstein would take advantage of the situation. In their interviews, the women described very similar situations, where Weinstein would appear naked in front of them, demand that they watch him bath, masturbate in front of them, threaten and intimidate them. Weinstein, through his representative, has denied all accusations of non-consensual sex. Since the New York Times published allegations of sexual harassment and assault against Weinstein in October, many men in entertainment, media and politics have faced allegations from inappropriate behaviour to forced sexual misconduct to rape. Of course, men have faced allegations before this, but the accusations against Weinstein have opened a floodgate, instigated an international conversation, and put new pressure on companies, industries and political leaders to respond. A look at some of the men accused since the Weinstein accusations emerged. Within entertainment there is actor Kevin Spacey, accused by at least 24 men of sexual misconduct or assault. Fired from House of Cards and replaced in Ridley Scott's completed film, Massachusetts prosecutors are investigating one allegation. His former publicist has said he is seeking unspecified treatment. Comedian Louis C.K., accused by 5 women of sexual misconduct. Planned release of film halted. Netflix special cancelled. He says the allegations are true and has apologised. Writer-director James Toback, accused by hundreds of women of sexual harassment. He has denied the allegations to the Los Angeles Times. Producer Chris Savino, accused of harassing up to 12 women, fired from Nickelodeon. Actor Tom Sizemore, accused of groping an 11-year-old actress in 2003. He denies the allegation. Actor Dustin Hoffman, accused by women of sexual harassing when she was 17. He has apologised for his behaviour. Within politics, there is US Senator Al Franken, accused of forcibly kissing a woman while rehearsing for a 2006 USO tour. Franken was also photographed with his hands over her breasts as she slept. Former President George W. Bush Sr., accused of patting 7 women below the waist while posing for photos with them. The 93-year-old Republican has issued repeated apologies. President Donald Trump, heard on film laughing about grabbing women by the pussy, that he can't help himself, he just starts kissing beautiful women, and saying that when you're a star, they let you do it. He denied any wrongdoing, calling it locker room talk. British Defence Secretary Michael Fallon, accused of inappropriate advances on 2 women, the Conservative has resigned. Sexual harassment and assault allegations have also emerged against a number of other UK political figures. From within sports, former South African Soccer Association President Danny Jordan, accused by former Member of Parliament Jennifer Ferguson of raping her in 1993. Jordan denies the accusation. The hashtag #MeToo movement caught fire days after the first accusation against Weinstein surfaced, when actress Alyssa Milano tweeted a call out to victims, so he might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem. More than 250,000 people were discussing hashtag #MeToo on Facebook, and there had been almost 350,000 posts tagged with that label just 24 hours after Milano's first tweet. But the online movement didn't start with Milano on Sunday. It started more than 10 years ago with activist Tarana Burke. Burke said that on one side it's a bold declarative statement that I'm not ashamed and I'm not alone. On the other side, it's a statement from survivor to survivor that says, I see you, I hear you, I understand you, and I'm here for you. She also said of Harvey Weinstein that for every Weinstein there's a Joe Blow who's doing the same thing in his community. Therefore, hashtag #MeToo has also allowed millions of everyday women and men to share their stories of sexual harassment and assault. We asked friends and family if they would like to share some of their stories. And so, here are our hashtag #MeToos.
I was 14 and was tutoring the young daughter of family friends. The girl's father would drive me home. One day he put his hand on my thigh and moved it up between my legs. I was shocked, frightened, confused, angry, ashamed and guilty. I thought that maybe I behaved incorrectly and somehow made him do this. I never told my mother. He was a family friend. More than 45 years later, I am still astounded that I should have felt guilty. He was behaving totally inappropriately and totally abused the trust put in him by my family. He should be ashamed of himself.
For the last 2 years, I've worked for a high street restaurant chain. And over the summers, part of my job was to work at a Gatwick Airport branch of it. It was the most sexual harassment that I've ever received. Comments ranged from, you look beautiful, but not as beautiful as the girl that just served us, to a large stag do who stood at the front of the restaurant. And when I very politely declined to give the stag my number, started shouting, you got rejected. And I think there's something quite more intimidating than a large group of 6'4" guys shouting at you. Things like when you're cleaning a table, I was cleaning a table with another girl and someone said, oi look, 2 for the price of 1. Sometimes it'd be more severe. It wasn't even just from customers. It was from colleagues themselves, including one that would regularly ask me on shift what my favourite sex position was, telling me, I bet you like it kinky. He fake choked me with his hands up to my neck in the middle of the restaurant next to customers, which was particularly humiliating. And honestly, I could go on and on and on and on. But I think the thing that people need to know is that they might say like, oh, well, you know, they're complimenting. Like, why don't you take that as a compliment? But it's not the same. Physically and emotionally draining to have someone say those things to you. It's not complimentary. It is to intimidate, is to put you down. In terms of my relationships with my then boyfriend, it was quite destructive. I felt guilty. I felt maybe it was my fault. Maybe I was encouraging them to say things like that. Maybe I was being too friendly, which as a friendly, I'd say, person, I started becoming quite rude. I started becoming quite closed off. Things to the point where my family was noticing it. Because I just didn't want to encourage anyone to say those things to me. I stopped wearing makeup just because I thought maybe that would stop comments. It didn't. There is nothing to gain from making that comment. It's selfish in a way, even though it's a comment about someone else. I couldn't say to the customer, that's unacceptable, I'm going to walk away, because I'd lose my job.
I was in South Africa, volunteering with my boyfriend at the time. We had a day off coming up and had chosen to go quad biking. On the way there, one of my friends told me the middle-aged man who owned and ran it had been called the creepy uncle by previous girls who had gone. When we arrived, we got given our quad bikes and were sent to do some practice laps on the quad bikes before we headed out. I was last to be given a quad bike, so all my friends were already gone, and as I got on, the man stroked all the way up my thigh. I didn't think much of it and went to the field to practice. After only one lap, the owner came over and told me I wasn't good enough to ride by myself, so I'd have to join him on his quad bike. From the moment I sat on the quad bike, he pressed himself up against me and would whisper things in my ear, stroke my thighs, and hold on to me around my waist before moving closer to my groin. There was nothing I nor my boyfriend or friends could do, as we were on this man's land. I felt powerless. He didn't wait for a yes or listen to a no. He just went for it, and I had no idea what he was going to do next.
I count myself as a strong woman. I campaign for women's rights, I am confident in my sexuality, and I thought I would be strong enough to say no. However, it has taken me many months to process that what occurred to me was in fact sexual assault by my at-the-time boyfriend. In the Christmas break of second year, I stayed for a few nights at my boyfriend's home. At this point, we'd been going out for about 15 months. Just before we went to sleep, he began to kiss and touch me up. This is something we both occasionally did, so no issue there. However, this time I was absolutely knackered and mumbled a sleepy, "not right now." Usually he would leave it, but for some reason he kept going. For the first time in 15 months, I had to be very clear and state, "No, please stop." I was angry, but equally I was incredibly tired, so decided to wait till morning to discuss it with him. It is important to note here that 1, I fall asleep very quickly and easily, and that 2, I'm a very deep sleeper, so it takes something considerable to wake me up. An hour or so after I fell asleep, I woke up to him having sex with me. I remember freezing and being so incredibly angry. It felt like a nightmare. Looking back now, I should have left immediately. I should have broken up with him. I shouldn't have let it go. I honestly couldn't tell you why I did let it go, but after an apology, that's exactly what I did. Over the next few months, our sex life, which was once healthy, deteriorated rapidly. This was partly due to university stress, he had dissertation deadlines, and I had a lot of commitments. But after a 2-week trip away at the end of summer, it finally hit me what the issues were, and at the heart of it was what happened at Christmas. Until then, it hadn't even crossed my mind that it was rape. Once it did, the words circled and circled around my head for weeks. Rape, rapist, sexual assault, victim. They still do. All these words are ones which I never thought I would associate with myself, but here I am. I would still count myself as a strong woman. In fact, I'm stronger. My advice is to talk about it. After opening up to those closest to me about what happened, I've realised how frequently this occurs. It needs to be a conversation. It is not okay. It is never okay. But the first step to moving forward is to admit that. I wish I could lie. I wish I had the luxury of lying. I hope that one day he can admit to what he did, because I hope he never repeats it. But I'm very determined to not let my ex control me physically or emotionally anymore. I hope this motivates someone else to start on that same journey.
1 out of 5 women will be victims of an attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. 91% of victims of rape and sexual assault are female.
Having heard these powerful stories, we wanted to see what people thought was the root of this sexual harassment epidemic. I'm here with a panel to discuss why there is such a problem with sexual harassment and assault. It's been reported it has reached epidemic levels in the UK, and we're going to find out what people think are the reasons why. A reminder that we will be discussing sensitive topics, which some may find distressing. So following that, let's meet our panel. We are joined by first year Jess, Ed a second year, Liv also a second year, and Emma who is in third year. In the news recently, we've seen a huge influx of accusations with high-profile actors from Dustin Hoffman to Kevin Spacey and the infamous producer Harvey Weinstein. Now, sexual harassment and assault goes beyond the high profile, and what I want to know is what you think is the deep-rooted issue. Ed, do you want to begin?
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly think that one of the main reasons is a sort of cultural and, by extension, slightly sort of religious issue on account of the fact that throughout sort of history, the role of a sort of man within society has been dictated quite significantly, and we're talking mostly in the Western world, and this one particularly in the UK, has been dictated a lot by religion and stuff like that. So, sort of as a result, particularly a sort of Christian idea of the man being in charge and stuff like that is created, and within sort of culture and stuff, a sort of a power dynamic which has resulted in men feeling as they can sort of get away with things, that sexual harassment is fine because a man's sort of needs are put first and foremost. And as sort of like we look throughout sort of history and stuff, that's come up quite a lot, particularly within, I think it was a Reformation ideas of early Protestant ideas of the man being the god of a household. I mean, if you look at that kind of language and stuff, it's not even particularly coded. It's very explicit in this idea that, as I said, men and by extension, women are sort of inferior in these ideas, and that as a result, sexual harassment and assault is, people can feel like they don't necessarily have to face any consequences as a result. It's sort of become a deep-rooted problem.
You can certainly see that kind of within the traditional values of society, the men were far above the women. And I get what you're saying. They kind of have this dominance over women that can be sort of stretched out into a sexual harassment arena as well.
I'm looking at more like the psychological aspect, but there was something that I looked at where while women are objectified sexually and they're seen as, obviously in traditional viewpoints of it, they're seen as being there to fulfill male desires, whereas men feel objectified in an economic sense, where they're there to provide for their family and provide for like society. But when they feel like they're being reduced to this objectification, they
have to find a way to take power back, which is one of the reasons why men harass women, because if you're being objectified, it's easy to objectify someone else and take power from them to gain power yourself.
And on that, it's almost like a sort of awful sense of owing. In that sense, it's this idea that the man provides, and then in return, in a horrible way, the woman provides back almost.
Talking about the ideas of objectifying someone else, what do you think it is for the woman? Like, what is the woman then objectifying?
Well, okay, I'm not going to lie, the study that I looked at didn't actually go into that specifically, but it just basically means that we as a society don't treat each other very nicely. So in a way, I suppose a woman could take that out on another woman. For example, when a lot of the victims have come forward, you see even women saying, oh, well, she might be lying, she's doing this to get attention. So I feel like in that way, women might be not objectifying each other, but sort of victimising each other.
Because the men do it to us women, and we don't feel the power to be able to do it back to them, so we search for other women to do it too.
Yeah, I think it's in that way because it's also performative masculinity in a way. Like, women see other women being sexually harassed or assaulted by men, or accusing men of sexual harassment or assault, and instead of being on their side, they prefer to be on the male side because that's where the power is. So by them going, oh, I don't believe that woman, I think she's just like a gold digger, she's trying to get attention, by doing that, they feel like they can sort of get in with men and they'll be seen as like an equal, when in reality it's just men going, well, that woman believes me, so I can just do that again, and people won't call me out for it.
Well, it's interesting because in the first few days after the Harvey Weinstein accusations came out, Donna Karen publicly said, oh, well, us as women, are we not dressing for it? Are we not calling them upon us? It's like, no, we are not.
And this whole idea of almost the underpinning religious values which have been perpetuated for sort of hundreds of years, where this idea that women are almost a sign of sort of temptation, again particularly within Protestant beliefs. Eve is basically all female figures within Christianity were effectively, they became evil within the sense of Protestantism, bar sort of one or two, but particularly Eve became a sort of subject of desire and manipulation almost, wittingly or otherwise. So, and again, this might feel like a bit of a sort of stretch and a tangent, but this idea of the woman Eve, that sort of encompassing all women as a whole, being seen as a sign of temptation and stuff like that. It's that being such a Christianity being such a sort of massive influence, even if we don't necessarily see it as explicitly as we used to, our society is still very close to it. So if that's something that is within the underpinning part of our culture, then obviously it's going to come into that. And I really think that that's one of the main reasons why sexual assault stuff happens, because people or necessarily sexual assault happens, but why it's not really being stopped, because as you said, when people, the women themselves even go, oh, well, are we dressing for it, did they almost deserve it, or are they just doing it for attention or something? It's the assumption that a woman is lying, whereas it's almost this idea that a man can have their word taken for, rather than having to try and go, oh, I've got all this evidence and stuff like that. I mean, obviously, the judicial system isn't necessarily as simple as that, but I feel that definitely within the public eye, that's definitely how it works.
Yeah, that's very true as well. What you were saying about Christianity is also that men are seen as having a sex drive and being sexually aggressive, whereas with women, they just apparently don't. Like, I did go to a Christian camp when I was a teenager, and we did have a seminar about sex. The main view of it was don't have sex till you're married. But at one point, they were talking about how, like, oh, but, men get these urges, so they have to, masturbate, essentially, to control their urges and things like that. No talk about girls. No talk at all about girls, because, obviously girls don't feel
pure and innocent.
We're pure and innocent, and we don't have any sexual desires whatsoever. But it's that idea of masculine desires being so powerful, but
and they override the female desires.
I mean, agency is usually taken away from the woman as a whole. I mean, they're not sort of spoken about.
No, completely. But the idea that men just go turn into beasts and just have to attack women is so silly, because I don't know, for example, if you were, Ed, if you're having sex with a girlfriend and your mum walked in, you'd immediately stop. Correct. Your sexual desire in that moment is not going to, just override everything. You'd stop. So men can control their desires. Yeah. It's just that underlying message of that they can't, which I think people rely on as well, because it's oh, but I just couldn't help myself. There was a leg. Ooh. It's
So why do you think that is?
I read a Psychology Today article, and it was about, why men assault women. And essentially it was saying that sex and violence are like very closely linked within our society. And it's like basically saying like in the late Victorian era, that was when this idea was started, that the male sexual drive was like really explosive and powerful, and they just couldn't control themselves. So that storyline is good for justifying male misbehaviour and has been used to justify men's effort to control where women go, what they say and how they dress. So essentially that idea is around because people want that idea to be around, because it's a lot easier to say, oh, but she was wearing a short skirt so I just had to, than going, well, I'm a creep and I don't respect women. Like, it's easier to blame the woman in that situation.
Yeah, then look at the underlying psychological issues. Yeah. And Emma, what do you have to say about that?
I think there's a massive problem with over-romanticisation of any kind of sexual encounter that's violent in popular culture, in real life. So often you find that relationships which have that not necessarily clear-cut abusive nature, but just a borderline abusive, something that's just not quite comfortable, is so often accepted. And in books, in films, in music, you constantly have, and this is not a recent problem, this is a problem that we've had in culture for hundreds of years, and not just in Western culture either, but there's something about violent sex which is massively over-romanticised, and it's like the woman should be grateful for that attention. If you look at the examples in culture, it's like she should revel in the fact that she's so irresistible. Like, I think that as a compliment, irresistible, is a terrible, terrible thing, because actually, if you can't keep your hands to yourself, I don't think you should be talking to me.
Again, as was what I said earlier about how the woman's agency is completely taken away whenever we talk about this. It's almost, I mean, as you said, the word irresistible implies that, it's not something necessarily that she's doing. It's just, the man just couldn't, like, what else, what was he going to do? It was just, there was an irresistible woman there, that was bound to happen. Like, it's this idea of inevitability is really prevalent within that, and it's something which is, as you said, is not recent. But one recent example of this romanticization of almost sort of abuse and stuff would be, and this is a very controversial one, is Harley Quinn and the Joker is an example of something that's very divisive, because yeah, exactly, it's a very, very uncomfortable thing to watch, and this isn't just in the most recent example, which I believe was Suicide Squad. This has gone back a long time through the comics and all that, and through its whatever influenced, was it Stan Lee or whoever wrote it? Either way, whoever influenced the person that wrote those characters in the first place. This is not it's not a recent phenomenon, this idea of abuse almost being like, oh, it's so quirky. Like, there's nothing quirky about abuse, it's just abuse.
It's also like the idea of like a violent act being like romantic. It's something that's taught to us as children. Like, if a boy is pulling your hair and hitting you on the playground, oh, it's because he fancies you. No, it's because this boy somehow has not got it through his head that poking my bruises is a mean thing to do. Like, it was so weird. And also that moment in a romantic film where there's a boy and a girl and they're having an argument and the girl like goes to run away and the boy grabs her arm and kisses her. That's meant to be a big romantic moment. And it's like, no, why can't you respect the fact that I'm irritated at you? I don't want to kiss you right now because we've just had an argument. It's things like that where they're taught to girls that they're meant to be romantic and something that they should want. But if you actually look at it, it's just very, uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable. And I think the thing that I find the most distressing about moments like that is that when they then turn the focus around to the woman's emotional reaction in that particular scene, it's like she's relieved. It's like, oh my God, I really wanted to walk out on this guy because he was being absolutely awful to me. But thank goodness he just assaulted me to keep me.
Well, I mean, honestly, one of the biggest examples I can give is the Twilight series. Edward literally stalks her. He sneaks into her room at night to watch her sleep. At one point, he messes up her truck so she can't drive somewhere because she wants to drive away and go see this other guy, and he messes up her truck so she can't drive there. He is literally an abusive boyfriend. But when I was 13, because everyone was like, this is so romantic and he's the best vampire boyfriend ever, I was like, wow, I wish someone would do that for me. And it's like, no, that's so awful that we're teaching young girls that this is romantic, because then it means that if they were in a relationship like that, they might not see the warning signs and they might actually think, but that just means he really loves me.
And also, underpin that again, to go sort of one step further, it's the reason that those views are then disseminated to people is because evidently people within the industry are abusive. I mean, I don't necessarily know if anyone within Twilight was, but you look, obviously all this Hollywood stuff, like the fact that these values are sort of being perpetuated within new media and stuff like that, evidently we can't necessarily say it's because of that, but I mean, you can't ignore the fact that the people within the industry are abusive, therefore are not necessarily opposed to making stuff which sort of defends them almost, to justify their abuse and things like that. Emma, again, what you said about this, people being shown this stuff from a young age, basically has meant that the people in the industry are the ones perpetuating these kind of ideas and stuff. Like, again, do you think that that's sort of the underpin reason, or do you...
If I was asked about what I thought was the primary reason that sexual assault is so common throughout the world, across cultures, across ages, across genders, colours, everything, it's because we are so often taught in every society and from every age that we have every right to make decisions about other people's bodies. And that doesn't just talk about sexual harassment, that talks about things like homophobia, about racism, ageism, all of these problems and prejudices. We are told all the time that it's okay to decide what someone else should be doing with their body or what their body should do. And that gives people a really dangerous excuse to act on those thoughts, on those decisions.
In what way do you think, or it's being perpetuated, that we have this influence over others?
Well, I think even if you look at, we've been talking about how religiosity plays into sexuality. Obviously, for most people, when you bring up that conversation, the first thing they're going to think about is homophobia. And they're going to think about how having a religion so often provides an excuse to say, well, I hate gay people, I hate trans people, because in my scripture it says that that's the wrong thing to do. But that's a matter of interpretation, and it's a choice. It's nothing that is latent in that whole culture. It's something that people have chosen to pick up on and act on. It's not something that you have to do, and it's not something, you don't have to dislike gay people to be a good Christian. That is not how it works. In fact, that's the absolute opposite of how it works. It's not a problem that is specific to Western civilization either, and it's not a problem that's specific to the Bible, homophobia, sexual assault, all of these sexual and bodily choices. It's something that's universal, and I can't really see that you can ascribe that to any particular cultural or religious view. Yes, it can definitely be a facet of that decision and to act in that way, but I don't think it can ever be the only reason. I think that there has to be something underlying and something bigger, which I think is very much about this, people being able to make choices about other people's bodies. Again, another example, abortion. How many people think that they have the right to decide whether a woman should carry a pregnancy to full term or not, regardless of their role in that woman and the potential child's life? We are just told that it's okay to make those decisions on other people's behalf, particularly in politics, I think, at the moment. And it's in some ways getting better, because you do have the passing of various laws and policies to protect people in vulnerable situations.
Having said that, do you think it's more of a 21st century issue because we now are kind of encouraged to stand up for our own thoughts and give our own opinions on things? And I think it can be said that a lot of people will interpret that as, oh, well, okay, I'll give my opinion, regardless of whether it's the most awful opinion ever and it will hurt others. It's my opinion and I have every right to give it.
Absolutely. I think that the concept of free speech is willfully abused in the modern day. Yes, you have every right to have an opinion, but I have no responsibility to listen to it. If it's your choice to say something that offends me and I find hateful and generally disgusting, I don't have to sit there and take it. You can say it all you want, but I don't have to give you a platform. And I think that people don't get that. I think that people think free speech means that they can say whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, and people have to listen. They don't have to listen. They absolutely do not. I think that's something that people are only just beginning to really understand. And I think as soon as that comes into play, well, I hope, rather than think, that people will perhaps start to listen more to victims of these kind of situations like sexual assault or other prejudices and harassment issues. I would really hope that we as a culture, as a society, would start to understand the importance of choosing when to listen.
And I think from a psychological aspect, a lot of people within abusive relationships will sort of stay it out thinking, oh, well, it's okay, he doesn't mean it, or she doesn't mean it, it was just said in the moment, or it was just done in the moment. What do you think can be done to kind of reassess that situation and
fully expressed that no, that's never okay, regardless of whether it was a one-time thing, it's not okay and you need to get out of an abusive relationship?
Well, I think that honestly just campaigns, basically. I think essentially I feel like with a lot of women, they won't realise that they're being abused until someone says to them, that's abuse. Like, emotional abuse especially, because it's like, but he doesn't hit me, he doesn't, like, do anything, like, actually violently aggressive towards me. But if you're being emotionally abused, like, it's awful because, gaslighting is a real problem because they might even be like, but has he actually said those things to me? Or am I just remembering it wrong? Like, he tells me that I'm not remembering things right and things like that. And I honestly feel like just trying to educate people as much as possible and saying, this is abuse and this is what abuse looks like. Abuse is not always a woman with a black eye saying that she fell over. And obviously, sometimes it is. But I think, obviously, I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on violent domestic abuse, but violent domestic abuse is always the thing that someone thinks of first when you say domestic abuse. Mm-hmm. So, and it also does mean that because people don't really know that much about emotional abuse, is that people go, but he didn't hit you. I don't understand why you're not still with him because he was such a lovely guy.
He didn't hit you or something
yeah,
like that,
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, Louis C.K. case, someone on my Facebook said something about like, oh, well, I don't see why everyone's being so awful about him. At least he didn't rape those women. I'm like, there can be no at least. No. With anything, if anyone's abused, harassed, assaulted a woman, even if it's only once, even if it's only like a minor thing, say you even groped them, anything like that, there cannot be an only just, because there never is, because it's violence. Like, even if it's not aggressive violence, it's emotional violence, and that's something that we as a society have to put our foot down and say, no, I'm not accepting this. And once people start doing that, I feel like we'll get to a time when people do actually listen to women and believe them the first time when they say, I've been abused, and they don't go into, but he's such a nice guy. That's something that gets me.
Yeah, and as I said, I mean, it's the thing you said about how, at least, like, it's that people almost searching for a loophole almost, and if we look at the mass media example again, this idea that it's almost the violent domestic abuse and stuff, and again is a massive problem as well, but it's often the only thing people sort of focus on, and it's always presented as a bad thing, but it's almost presented as the only way it can be manifested, in the way that abuse is manifested. So, for example, it's almost made into an artistic thing. It's made into it's made into art, and therefore it's such a striking image and such a singular image that it's almost the only thing anyone ever thinks of.
Yeah, also I feel like we do need to focus on male domestic abuse and sexual assault as well, because obviously if people think of domestic abuse, they normally think of thin white woman looking out the window and like crying and things. And obviously we do need to look out for those women, but we need to also focus on male domestic abuse and sexual assault, because the reason why men don't report things like that, and the reason why we don't see as much male victims is because it's this culture of shame, because it's like, oh, but you're a man, why couldn't you have fought her off, you're so much bigger than her, why couldn't you have...
This idea of masculinity comes into both the victim and them as the perpetrator, because I think there's a lot of justification that comes across when men do sexually assault as like, oh, but such a man, look how masculine he's being.
Or even in the case of Harvey Weinstein, but you're such a great producer.
Oh, God.
Like that kind of thing.
And it's also like, I think we really need to destroy a lot of the preconceptions that people have about things like this. Like, as part of my research, I did read some articles about men who had been sexually assaulted, and one of the most hard-hitting quotes I saw was, my life was ruined because girls can't rape boys. And I was like, ouch. The fact that there's people that believe that is just so horrible to me, because of course they can. Of course girls can sexually assault. It's not a masculine thing.
Well, it's always, I mean, within the legal system, it's tailored towards, I don't want to say reverse sexism, but in the sense that legally a woman can't rape a man.
Yes.
It's the fact that it's within British law, and this might be different in other countries. Within British law, rape is specifically forced penetration.
Yes, it is.
Which means that, and again, this can be traced back to the idea that a man, you have to be you're the dominant one, you can't control your woman and they get out of control or whatever, then, that's your fault for not being a better man almost. And this idea of toxic masculinity, almost, it's man shooting man in the foot in the same way that when a woman condemns another woman for coming out, in the same way men do the same to men as well.
Exactly.
It's this whole massive problem with it.
It's like with Finn Wolfhard, he came out and said, I really do not like it when people call me daddy, when people call me sexy, because I'm a 14-year-old. And there were loads of guys quote tweeting him being like, oh, it's creepy, going, oh, what are you complaining for? A 27-year-old model hit on you. I'd have died if I was your age and that happened to me. I'm like, well, no, because it's still a 27-year-old.
Yeah, it's a 27 model who said, hit me up in 4 years, to a 14-year-old boy, which is as close to paedophilia as you can get without it being explicitly paedophilia. I mean, it's awful.
It is terrible.
It comes into this part. It's sexual harassment and assault on a publicly known child as well.
Yeah.
Like he is a child. He's just a child. He's a very good actor. Whatever. He's a child. He doesn't. 14. I mean, God knows. Like, I mean, Jess, you haven't really said much.
I was going to come back on what you said about the legal aspects of it, and people not actually knowing legally what assault is. Like, I'm going back to like my own situation of when I was harassed or assaulted on holiday with my family when I was a kid, not knowing, like I was groped by a man on like the street and not knowing that was assault, and actually having to go online and look up the definition of what assault is to realise actually that is assault, and not enough women know that.
And I think that's what prevents a lot of women from acting upon these events that happen in their lives, because they just don't know. You know, I had something when I was in South Africa and I was quad biking, and I had never been quad biking before, and the manager there basically said to me, no, you're not good enough, you've got to share a quad bike with me, which was rubbish. I could perfectly, handle this quad bike. And he made me sit up against him, and he was stroking my legs and my body and everything. And I had no idea. I was like, what am I supposed to do here? I'm trapped on this quad bike with him. There is nothing I can do.
So often, I think examples of sexual assault can be conceived as someone being nice.
Oh, absolutely. I was like, oh, is he trying to comfort me?
Yeah, he's just being a pervert. But like, I had kind of like a similar thing at a club here in Exeter. I know we're not talking too much about uni, but one time when I went out, it was just after I started going out clubbing, just after my 18th birthday. One of my friends had cut herself on a bit of glass, and I was like standing with her while she was having first aid. This guy I'd never ever met in my life came up to me, took my hand and was like, babe, it's going to be okay. I was like, yeah, I know. Why are you touching me? People so often think that's a good excuse. It's a good excuse to touch someone, to talk to someone, to look at someone in a way that is in no way excusable, because it's just being nice. You're just flirting. You're just being kind.
Or even like this idea that, he was protecting you. Like
Exactly.
It comes. I don't want to keep repeating myself too much. It's men being taught and their position in society as being the protector and the dominant and that kind of thing. It's said that if there was a woman in distress, you've got to help them and rubbish such as if anyone's in distress, you'd help them. But I mean, you were fine. It was your friend had cut their foot or whatever. Like it's completely crazy. I mean, again, it's this implicit idea that you almost owe him the attention, which is like awful. Like,
well, yeah, I looked at a study about this, and also like it's just boys and men don't know what sexual assault is either. To a lot of people, sexual assault and things like that, it's like it's a big bad man in an alley who like reaches out and grabs you, and it's all scary. But
a sort of faceless.
Yeah, faceless man. Because obviously, if you went up to someone and was like, "Would you rape someone?" They'd be like, "Oh God, no, that's horrible." But my study, so it's basically a study that's been going on since the 1980s. This lady called Mary Koss actually came up with it, and this is a quote from her. So specifically, so it's a survey that's given to young men, essentially. Specifically, when survey items describe behaviours, i.e. have you ever coerced someone to intercourse by holding them down, instead of simply labelling them, have you ever raped somebody, more men will admit to sexually coercive behaviours in the past, and more women will self-report victimisation. A couple of years ago, they redid this study at the University of North Dakota. The first thing that they had was, would you force a woman to have sex with you if there were no consequences and no one would ever find out? And 31.7% of men said they would. Whereas if you say, would you rape a woman and there would be no consequences, no one would ever find out, only 13.6% of them.
You say only.
I know, not only. Yeah. I say only, but like
compared
in comparison, that's like a 20% jump. It is completely the same thing. But I think that there's such a thing where people are like, oh, but I'm not a rapist. I'd never do that. But yes, what you're doing is rape. And I feel like so many men actually don't understand that. So you do get that culture of, unfortunately, victims going to their attackers and saying, you raped me, and they go, no, I didn't. I didn't rape you.
Of if you don't put a name to it,
Yeah.
it's not that. It didn't
Yeah.
happen
And
like
that's why campaigns such as the Me Too one is so important, and that's sort of why we're doing this podcast. And we'll be talking a bit more about Me Too, I believe, in the next podcast.
Yeah.
But I won't sort of dwell on it too much. But again, it's this idea of attempting to combat what we've evidently identified as one of the key underpinning factors, which is, I don't want to say lack of awareness, but evidently people not really knowing what is and isn't, which by no means justifies it. But evidently, if you educate people, they're less likely to do something which they then understand as wrong.
Yeah.
But if you look at the North Dakota example, it's obviously people, again, looking for a way around saying they're a rapist. Because no one wants the label of being a rapist, no one wants to have the label of being, a sexual assaulter. But if you give it a sort of different name, people are evidently looking at, oh, well, that's what it is, so it's fine then.
Well, yeah, I do think that when lads grope girls in clubs, I don't think they know that what they're doing is sexual assault. Like, I think if you went up to a lad and you just sexually assaulted that girl, and they'd be like, no, I didn't. Oh, I just groped her. And they'd be like, well, that language that we have, it's like, the Harvey Weinstein, it's a sex scandal. He inappropriately touched them.
He
groped.
Sex pests and stuff, rather than sexual harassers.
He groped. He touched them. Things like that. It's like, no, he sexually assaulted them, and we need to start saying sexually assaulted rather than groped or touched inappropriately, because it softens it so much. But it's like, oh, maybe he's just your creepy uncle kind of thing. Honestly, the fact that that's even like a stereotype.
That's exactly what the guy who did this to me in South Africa was deemed as, the creepy uncle. And I was like, okay.
Why has no one stopped him?
Exactly. And this was fully known. I did it through a volunteering company, and this was like one of the day trips that you could do. And on the way there, we'd been discussing in the car, and some of the girls were like, oh, I've heard that apparently the manager is a bit weird. And we just kind of been
weird.
Right, so we just been laughing about it.
Yeah.
Because we just been like, oh, seems ridiculous, But the second we arrived there, and my then boyfriend at the time was there as well, none of us could do anything about it. We were completely powerless, and we were just at the hands of this man because we were on his territory in South Africa. He was a powerful man. There was simply nothing that we could do. And that's what was the scariest thing to me. I was like, I have no control over this situation. There is just nothing that I can do to prevent this from happening.
And that's why the little things matter so much. That's why they're so terrible, because every single act of sexual assault, aggression, whether it's verbal or physical, or even just looking at someone in a way that you wouldn't want to be looked at, every act is a symptom of the belief that you have the right to make someone do something they don't want to. And that is terrible.
So having had this discussion, I feel like a lot of ideas have come out, but would you say that this is a fundamental issue that boys and girls are taught from day one, or do you think this happens later on? Is it, only when you hit sort of teenage years we start having these ideas put on to us?
Well, I think if you just go back to Disney, Snow White, who you watch that when you're 3, and the idea of someone being asleep and a guy going up and kissing them, waking them up, it's in society from the beginning.
Really true. I'd never thought of it like that before.
Yeah.
That's really creepy.
It's in society from the beginning, but I think it becomes a much bigger issue when you enter kind of parts of society where there isn't a gender balance. And I think ultimately it does come down to gender balance, because obviously if there was a gender balance in film industry, you wouldn't have these kind of ideas of like Disney and those kind of ideas being all right in the first place. Yeah, I think gender equality in the workplace is the biggest thing for me, because not only does it affect the people at work, but it's the ideas that they put out that then affect younger people. And Ruth Davidson, she said, and I really liked her idea on it, she said it's never about sex, it's about power. And I completely agree with that. If a man has, and most of the cases are about men having power over women. We found out yesterday that according to the gender pay gap are going to be working for free for the rest of the year because the gender pay gap is so big. The idea that men having power over women puts them in jeopardy, because if you're at work and you've got a job and a man assaults you or approaches you and makes you uncomfortable, you're not going to report it because it's your job and you could lose that job. So ultimately I think it comes down to power.
Yeah, and I think you could also say that with the gender pay gap and these, traditional ideas that only really now are just being tackled, usually speaking within society, men are in more powerful positions than women. And I think I totally agree. I think it comes down to power. It's the idea that I have power over you. Because of that, there's nothing that you can do once I've inflicted this power on you.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, but I also think that it's also the way that we sort of teach girls that, like, it's kind of like a put up and shut up thing. Like, you're going to get groped on a night out, just leave it because it's not worth it. Like, yeah, there's like creepy Dave in the office who comes over and rubs your shoulders, but you know what, just get on with it because, you know, it's not that bad. And it's that idea of it's not that bad, at least like you've not been raped or something like that. And just it's that sort of culture that we inflict on women and girls where it's like, it's not worth it, don't make a scene, just get on with it.
And going back to what you said at the beginning with this mentality of when boys are flirting with us when we're younger, they're physically abusive to us by poking us and like making fun of us and stuff, and this was just a sign of them flirting, so don't worry about it, he just likes you. As if that was okay, like we should be so happy. Please keep on just like prodding me, that's great.
But it's this idea of depth as well.
Yeah. Why should I be happy that he likes me? Why is that the justification of him like touching me?
Yeah.
Because he likes me? Well, okay, great, I don't like him back, so why is this a big deal?
That idea that when women like report people to HR or something like that, because if someone's been creepy to them and someone goes, you know what, I don't have to put up with it, and they report them, they become a nuisance.
Yeah.
They become this hysterical evil woman who's done it on purpose, and why would you even do it, it's not that bad, you're making a big deal.
He's got a family to consider and something like that. It's like,
well, he should have considered the family before he grabbed your thigh.
Also, it's also this culture of men taking women going, hey, I've been sexually harassed and assaulted and I'm not okay with it and I'm going to tell people about that, and I'm going, oh no, can I not smile at a woman anymore, can I not put my hand on your knee, can I not be friendly anymore, can I not wink at anyone? I'm like, well, you probably shouldn't be winking or putting your hand on anyone's knee in the workplace anyway, and yeah, so you shouldn't be doing that. You should not be interacting with someone in a workplace in a way that isn't professional. It's that way
that the women, like we are in a workplace, I find often under a lot more scrutiny. Yes.
Very true.
You must dress appropriately, and certain number of buttons must be done up, and the skirt length must be a certain length. And doesn't this just go back to the whole thing? I mean, I completely agree there should be a certain level of professionality in the way that you dress. However, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Because at the same time, why should the fact that you can see my knee be so much that this man is overcome?
I've got a cousin who's 10 years older than me. She's not working currently, but she used to have an office job in London, and she told me one day that when she went in for her work review, her boss was like, I'm really sorry, but there is a bit of a problem. And she was like, oh no, what am I doing wrong? And her boss was like, well, you don't wear makeup into the office. How dare you? How actually dare you? Would you go up to one of your male colleagues and say, sorry Dave, you can't come in today, you haven't had a haircut? So
where a woman got fired because she wasn't wearing heels to work.
Sort of three main issues where there's sort of power, debt and norms basically. So again, but power and debt also becoming, particularly with the Harvey Weinstein thing, it was applied to both men and women in this particular case, because the women felt they had a debt so they didn't come out to do it. They felt like they had a debt to Harvey Weinstein because he was a big film producer and could unfortunately ruin their careers if they tried to sort of speak out against him. Evidently, the people that came out against him sort of had enough influence get around that. But in the same way, I think it was it Quentin Tarantino, I think was it, that came out and said that he knew before but was afraid to speak out because he felt like he would be basically just shot down and ignored by media because they'd be like, oh, well, it's Harvey Weinstein. Of course he wouldn't do it. So it's this idea that some men do it intentionally, but also others almost feel like they are they end up becoming complicit with this kind of stuff because they are afraid to speak out as well for fear of being almost emasculated and stuff like that as a result. And it's
I think also going back to the thing where you said about the actresses and things and how they didn't feel like they could come out because he was a producer, there's such a culture of women having to sacrifice their personal well-being and feeling of comfort so men can feel better about themselves. Like the whole thing where can't I smile at women anymore? It's like, why is your comfort more important than these sexual assault allegations? Like, why should these women not have come out just because Harvey Weinstein's such a great producer? Like, I think we really need to like counteract that idea that women should just sacrifice themselves and everything that they have because, well, it would upset a man.
You sort of asked Lottie that, you know, was it something that's from birth or is it later on? It's definitely from, as basically the moment that you get anything, and this idea of gender stereotypes are damaging more than just this idea of sexist comments at work and low self-esteem on both genders. It goes beyond that. It definitely extends to sexual assault because people, again, as I said earlier, men feel as though they have a role of a duty of sort of protection, which apparently extends to people feeling as though they can go way beyond people's personal boundaries. And for women, they are sometimes pushed by society to just accept, you know, the man's just doing, you know, he's under so much pressure to be a man, you know, how dare you speak out against his attempts to be such a good male figure. Definitely from birth, it goes throughout and it doesn't stop. It carries on within current media and stuff as well.
And I think it's self-perpetuating because you learn those warped norms as a child, and then when you grow up and then you enter a work culture where there isn't like a gender balance, and then the men who think that those are normal can then put that back through media to those children, and it just carries on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and then also, I mean, you said it's from birth. You can tell it's from birth because, like, you have babies having, like, well, for example, there's a baby grow where one you can get for a boy that says, I want to be a superhero, and one that's for a girl that says, I want to be a princess. And it's like, that's a gender norm. And there's also when two toddlers, like if a little boy and a little girl are just playing together, everyone's there going, ooh, he's such a lady killer. Look at him flirting with her. I'm like, no, he's just drooled on a brick because he's a baby. Like, or if babies like slightly close their eyes so it looks like they're winking, they're like, ooh, he's a lady killer already. And it's like, no, he's a baby.
Yeah. For me, part of the issue is that we're all taught to act before we speak, because that is just the natural progress of development. You learn how to wave and smile before you learn how to talk. But we need to change the order of that round when we're talking about development, which is taught, and the way that we're taught to interact with other people. You need to learn to think and to talk things through before you do things, because if you're doing something to another person, specifically if it's in any way sexual, if you couldn't talk about that to your closest friend or to the person that you're doing it to, you shouldn't be doing it.
So just to kind of bring this discussion to an end, if I can just go around and ask you guys, what do you think is the one main focus that should be done to help tackle sexual assault? If I start with you, Liv.
Well, I think that we should change the way that we talk about sexual assault, and I think there should be a lot more education. And I do think that children should be taught from when they first have sex education. I do think they should be taught what sexual assault is, what sexual harassment is, things like that, and also consent. And also I feel like we need to change our conversations about consent from no means no to yes means yes, rather than saying, oh, but she didn't say no, she didn't say anything, so how can you prove that she didn't want it, instead of saying to someone, hey, would you like me to do this to you? And they're going, yes. I think that's the conversation that should be had, rather than someone not saying no to you, because obviously in a lot of situations victims feel like they can't say no. Like, I mean, in a club, if someone gropes you, you can't just turn around and like scream no at them because they're probably already gone.
And what about you, Jess?
I agree about the education. I mean, going back to my own sex ed in school, all we did was watch that tea advert done by the police. I don't know if you saw it, where it was like, don't give someone a cup of tea if they don't want it. And we had that, and then how to use contraception. That was it. That was the only sex ed. So I think definitely giving people the legal definitions of what assault is, because that's going to actually let people know where they're breaking the law, and to remind them how serious it is as well. But then also, like I was saying about having a gender balance in workplaces, I think would go a long way to put people in their places and to remind them what's acceptable and what's not.
I definitely agree that talking about it and educating on it is very important. What's perhaps even more important, more fundamental, is learning to listen and learning when you should shut up and you should just think about what this person is telling you, what they're confiding in you, whether they felt uncomfortable or something awful's happened to them, or they're worried that something awful's happened to them, or even, from the flip side of the coin, that they're worried that they're going to do something that isn't appropriate. We should learn to not always have an opinion on everything. We should learn to listen without feeling the need to judge. And I think that you would find people making these assumptions about other people's bodies and other people's habits a lot less often.
I basically agree with all three of you, obviously, but if you to identify one particular thing, definitely this idea of language and teaching. So as Jess said, talking about the definitions and stuff, and as Liv said, talking about making people know exactly what sexual assault and what rape and what constitutes as each, because they're very serious things, and this idea of making sure that people know from birth and trying to eliminate this idea of what a man should do, what a woman should do, will definitely go a long way to helping achieve all of the previous aims that everyone else already said.
And I think it's important as well, not just within the education of children within schools, but also looking further out into the media, and to just end this romanticisation of abuse and sexual assault and violence in a romantic relationship, even between friends. I think that's really fundamental. So thank you very much for everyone coming on. I think we've had some really good discussion.
Having discussed the reasons for sexual harassment and assault in society, many interesting ideas have emerged. Most notably, an idea that to battle the culture of sexual assault, we must first more clearly define what it is. In the next podcast, we will be focusing on sexual harassment and assault in university, and we're going to see what students define as sexual assault. Thank you very much for listening.
The Me Too podcast. Me too.
Me too.
Me too.
Me too.
Me too.
Me too.
Me too.